I'm so happy to see you all. Happy 2022, whatever that means to you. I don't know what it means to me anymore. I'm just going to be honest about that. Anyway, welcome to the Hope Desk. I'm Kimberly Dark, and I'm a writer and sociologist and storyteller. I have simple answers for you about some of your questions on social inequality. And, it's true. People just like you write and give me questions. You can find me on social media and ask questions, ask that I talk about a certain thing. Sometimes people ask that I talk about a certain thing from a certain angle, like that's possible too. You can just ask for what you want. I can always say no, right? So I just want to point out to you, I don't have all the answers. I don't have the only right answers. I will just spend some time with you each month doing what I can to address a few of these issues because I think it is hopeful when more people know enough about a topic to at least enter into civil public discourse about it. So I'm not here to offer you in-depth scholarship on these topics. In most cases, other people are more qualified to do that than I am. But I do bring a sociological perspective to these topics, and I think that that is sometimes useful in looking at an issue in its social context. So that's what I'm trying to do here. And as usual, thank you to Emily for being our tech facilitator. I don't ever want to forget to thank you. And here it's a new year, so I'm remembering things. So hey, we're going to talk about public guardians, and we're going to talk about mindfulness today. And I'm going to start with the one that I like better, mindfulness. I'm going to start there. So I'm going to roll along and tell you some things, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer some questions. And then I'm going to end up asking you a question too about where you might be able to talk about these things in your everyday regular life if you choose to. So I'm just letting you think about that question ahead of time as we go along. So, hey, here was the question, like, why are teachers and other people always talking about mindfulness, right? Like, isn't that like a religious thing? And how can like calming down help me learn? That's how the question was actually framed. And I thought, wow, that's a really good question to answer. So, obviously you find other ways to look at this, but I'll tell you mine. So, no, mindfulness is not religious. Most world cultures have ways that people engage embodied wisdom. So, that's one way to think about mindfulness. Most world cultures have ways, and also religions have ways for people to connect with their breath or calm their thoughts. Ways that people do that, right? And so, like, I mean, I hate to say it, but if you're a Catholic, you probably engage in prayer. If you're a Buddhist, you probably engage in meditation. Look, if you're just a garden variety American, you might also drink wine in the evening. And I'm not saying like that's a great way to calm the mind, but it is part of what those practices are. So you can look for them in American secular culture as well. You know, we are doing that in various ways. The thing where you like lie down at the end of a long day and like scroll on your phone for a while, that's also a calm the nervous system sort of thing to do. So back to the question about education. Why is this useful in terms of learning? So check it out. I don't know if you've ever, had a situation where you're going into a classroom and there's like a million things happening, and then you get there and you get in your seat and you have to like multiple levels of you have to arrive. Yeah. Sometimes that's harder than others. You may have noticed that in your own life. And so the idea of actually practicing taking a few deep breaths where you focus on the breath, or doing a body scan where you're like, oh, my feet are on the floor. I feel my feet touching the floor. You could try this right now, even, couldn't you? You can feel my butt in the chair. My butt is touching the chair. I can feel my breath coming in and out of my body. There's something about this practice that helps us arrive. You know what else helps us arrive is just the ritual of arrival. Maybe you've noticed this, like that, if you take a yoga class regularly, for instance, or Tai Chi or Qigong or some kind of thing like this, that it's not just when you start doing the stuff that you feel the mind body connection kick in. Often it's like as soon as you walk through the door of the studio, right? Because there's a ritual involved in doing that. So there are folks who are like, yeah, let's bring that into the learning classroom as well. I just want to point out that there's some different ways to, think about this mind body connection. So there's a psychologist, a while back, like I think he came up with this idea in the 70s. I'm talking about Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and yeah, no, I can't spell that for you right now. But he came up with the idea of flow. I bet you have heard of this. So the idea that if you feel too challenged by a task, then you're just anxious, right? If you feel too much comfort in a task, then it's boring. And really, there's this kind of space in between where challenge meets comfort, where you're, activated. And he called that flow, right? Being in a state of flow. I think you could also think of that as a place where you are embodied, a place where you are mindful and embodied, that both of those things are happening at once. This is also what happens when, I don't know, like you're painting a picture and you get really into that, and your hand is moving to paint and your mind and your breath are present, and all of a sudden an hour and a half has passed and it felt like 10 minutes. These are the kinds of mind body states that a whole ton of people have written about as being useful and potentially useful in the classroom as well. So I mentioned Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, but I also want to mention a name I can pronounce and spell, and that is Parker Palmer. He is a sociologist, actually, but his biggest work has been in the field of education. He's written a number of books about engaged democracy as well, so you could look him up if you would like to. But Parker Palmer really talks about taking seriously the intelligence part of emotional intelligence. And, he comments on how like the word professional originally meant someone who makes a profession of faith, professes faith in the midst of a challenging world, right? And that root meaning became diminished as the centuries rolled by, and I would say as capitalism took hold. And today it's all but disappeared, and now we think of professionals as people who possess specialized knowledge, rather than people who are deeply engaged in the work that they're doing, like putting both skill and heart and soul into something. So I think that is really useful. I'm just gonna share with you a few things that he has talked about, Parker Palmer, from this is from an article about the new professional that was in Change magazine a while ago. This article is like, it's not Googleable, which is why I didn't give you a link for it. But actually, though, Emily, you could look up the Center for Courage and Renewal online if you don't mind, and give folks that link. I'm just realizing it now. That would
Sure.
be a good place to find Parker Palmer's work.
Center for Courage and Renewal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he asserts that we have to help students uncover and examine and debunk the myths that institutions are external to and constrain us, as if they possess powers that render us helpless. And this is, he says this is an assumption that is largely untrue. And also that we take students' emotions as seriously as we take their intellects, and that we start talking about intelligence and what it means to be emotional in useful ways, right? We always talk about emotions as being, something kind of messed up, like you shouldn't have so many of those. But, Palmer would tell us that's nonsense. He also talks about offering our students knowledge and skills and sensibilities required to cultivate communities of discernment and folks, I am going to, well, Emily is going to share a link with you that is a book by Beth Barilla, who that I really would love for you to read. It's a little pricey because it's an academic text, but it doesn't read like one. It really reads in a useful way. But this is helping students understand like what it means to live and work with the question of an undivided life, like of feeling undivided, not just in mind and body, but also with regard to our profession and our values, right? And how those potentially can come together. So, so these are some things that I want to say to you about the usefulness of mindfulness practice in education. I want to say something else, though, which is, and Emily can share a link to an article I wrote on this topic, and that is that no one should be required to come into the body and into the emotions, especially in a place like school. There are a lot of us. Like I'm a yoga teacher as well as being a writer and a sociologist and these other things that I do, and so like I want to use these kind of skills and approaches in the sociology classroom as well, because I think yoga is really useful. But whew, this is tricky sometimes because, hey, there are a lot of power imbalances in university classrooms, in high schools, in any schools, right? There are power imbalances that are de facto. They are there when we arrive. Like we didn't do anything to make them, but they're there. Like the most obvious one is the power imbalance between the teacher and the students in those kind of environments. But we're always navigating the power imbalances that have to do with gender or race or disability. We're always navigating those. And I think that it's a really messed up thing to say, oh, you students, part of your participation in this class means that you have to cultivate, you have to come into your body. No, a lot of folks really are guarding themselves reasonably so when they are in classroom environments, and I think we dare not forget that. um, that's important. That's not to say I don't want to use those practices in those settings, because I definitely do, but I think knowing it's a choice when to come into the body, and that it's also an act of mindful self-preservation sometimes not to do that. Yeah. So it's when we don't know we have a choice that we can be easily manipulated by others, and I think that's helpful. So that's an article from Yoga International that I wrote for them a few years ago on this topic about when mindfulness feels forced. So I just want to pause here for a moment and see if folks have things they want to say or ask about the idea of mindfulness practice um, in educational settings in particular, or just in general. Yeah, somebody's saying, why are academic textbooks so pricey? It sucks. And I of the four books that I have out, one of them was with an academic press, and I like fought to have it be a reasonably priced book, and the lowest we could get it was $25, which is still cheaper than this book I'm recommending to you. But I don't think I would publish with an academic press again because it's not accessible. I sure appreciate that perspective. You can feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask something. And if you don't have anything to ask, don't fret. I have more to say.
Kimberly.
Yes.
Hi. So I guess I have a question about making mindfulness acceptable
Mm.
in the academic environment and the professional environment. I see a lot of chatter about it, right? And you can go take your lunch break and go to a mindfulness course, but to actually pause in between meetings, to pause in the middle of the day isn't generally acceptable. At least not what I've seen in the environments that I've been in.
Yeah.
But even, I think one of my biggest reliefs is sighing, and being told, don't let them hear you sigh, don't let them see you.
Wow. Wow. I love that you brought up sighing, because I think that there are some really great ways that we find to connect with the breath and to release breath or to release tension and anxiety. And it's not always like, I'm going to meditate right now or I'm going to do yoga right now. But yeah, I want to acknowledge that what you're saying is really true, and that this is part of the reason I think this question comes up when mindfulness practices enter educational settings, is because that is a countercultural practice. So, like, just acknowledge the fact that educational settings are structurally designed to disembody us. So think about how those settings actually work. Like, for instance, I teach at a university where is a new university, right? It is within the last, I'm trying to think, within the last 40 years that university was literally built from the ground up, constructed, and all of that. Now, we have known for far longer than that good pedagogy, right? Good teaching practices require, in the humanities, in the social sciences, in any kind of subject where people talk to each other, right? Where there's discourse, it's useful for people to be able to see one another while they're having a conversation. We have known that for way longer than before that university was constructed. And are there still chairs bolted into the floor in rows in theater style? There absolutely are. I always say to people that, when I finally do snap at the university, it is going to involve me hurling desks off of a balcony, because I am constantly in the position where, in order to put chairs in a circle, desks have to be taken out of the room. Sometimes I can't even get a room big enough to have the whole class in a circle. It is everything about that environment is keeping that from happening. Similarly, just the way those chairs are put together. Like, for instance, not everybody's body fits into that funny little desk chair combo situation, but also they're not comfortable for very long. And yet we know that people are sitting in them for many, many hours in a day. So what's happening there? Like, it is very much countercultural to say, my body matters in this setting. My body matters here. And I guess what I am suggesting to you with regard to bringing mindfulness practice into educational settings is that actually there is wisdom in the body that we are cutting off that might enable us to actually understand the topics at hand differently. And so yes, I guess I just want to validate your perception that these practices are not respected well. But there is more and more research coming out that is showing that students appreciate these practices, that they feel the effects of these practices. I think there is less data, but still it's starting to show up that looks at, do students actually have better work? Do they have better tests? Do they have better outcomes as a result of this? But there's definitely research that shows that qualitatively students feel a difference when these practices are brought in. Anything else right now?
I just want to say I've usually worked with at-risk populations when I was teaching, and just having an opportunity to put what's going on at home to rest and invite them to pay attention to what's going on here, because you can't fix it's significant. And I want to always advocate that their life and their survival is first before their learning. And I think this is an opportunity to attend to that.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And even as simple as, sometimes it can literally be as simple as, like, I do 5 minutes at the beginning, of 5 minutes of bring your breath into your body, bring your body into the chair. It's, like, we're going to be here now. We're going to be in the presence of other people, and then, make eye contact with someone else in the room. This is where we're going to be for an hour and 15 minutes or whatever the time is. We're going to be here now. Hey, let's shift gears and talk about public guardianship. And you can come back around and talk about these other things later if you come up with another question. So, hey, some of you probably follow me on social media, and you know that I am in a situation right now with my family where my mother has Alzheimer's, and she has been reluctant to receive care, anyone's care, my care, the care of doctors, care of, she does not wish to have care. she wishes to be left alone, but that has become impossible because she is no longer safe, right? So consequently, some of you may have seen, me post about these things. I believe that this question about what is public guardianship came out of, the conversations that I'm having online, and probably reluctantly on my part, I have come to learn more than I ever thought I wanted to know about what it means for a person to be vulnerable and to need care and probably not want it. So let me just try and do my best to answer this question about what is public guardianship. The first thing that I want to say about this question is that in the United States, which is the only place that I can talk about, I don't know how this looks in the UK or in Australia, or I don't know. And if somebody has thoughts, like you live in one of those places and you'd like to put them in the comments, I would really welcome that. But even in the United States, public guardianship is different in all 50 states. It looks different place to place to place. So, y'all know I can't stop myself. I'm going to have to start this conversation by saying, consider what happens when a person in the United States cannot care for themselves. Consider what that means. And I think that we cannot consider that question without considering who is deemed to be worthy of care in the United States. Because do we understand that care is differentially offered depending on your embodiment, your identity, your situation, right? Because look, when I started thinking about this idea of public guardianship, when a person is not capable of caring for themselves, the state intervenes. Now, theoretically, a much larger percentage of us could be under public guardianship, right? Theoretically, anyone who has found themselves without a home, anyone who is living outdoors. I mean, that is kind of failure to thrive. But, because not everyone is deemed worthy of care, that is not how we think this way. Because it could be possible for people to actually not reach the place where they need public guardianship by having additional support systems in place that actually extend care. All right, so there's a related system to public guardianship that is called adult protective services. There's also child protective services, and you may have heard of that. And here's the thing. We tend to socially deem children more worthy of care than adults, especially if they are not yet teenagers, because sometimes Child Protective Services decides that they are too overburdened to handle teenage issues, because those people are about to be adults, and that you're going to make it. There's the finish line right over there. You got it, right? But elementary school kids in particular, Child Protective Services takes care of them. Adult Protective Services, on the other hand, really only try to help a person when they are in dire circumstances. Like there's been some kind of failure of housing, medical, or mental health. And that is the main thing I want to say about conservatorship, right? Is that the focus is on the mentally disabled. And so, as probate conservator, public guardians are involved in all aspects of the person's life, including financial management, housing, medical care, placement, advocacy. They're responsible for directing the mental health treatment and placement of those people in their care. So, for instance, a person that might come into public guardianship might be a person who, let's just stay with the example of Alzheimer's, since it's the one that I have most immediate experience with. This might be a person who has lost the ability to manage their finances. They live in a house, but they no longer have electricity or running water, and they can't figure out how to cook food for themselves. And they need care, but it's not like they just need a doctor or some medicine and things are going to get better. They need long term management. And oftentimes, these are people who actually do have resources because I just got to say it, right? We don't live in a culture that sees poor people as worthy of care in the same way, right? So often, these are people who have resources, and the state says, right, you got to care for yourself. We're going to assign somebody to manage your resources so that you will be cared for. So that is what a public guardian does. And oftentimes those are mental health professionals because they are, managing that person's mental health care. They're not providing it. They're not providing, counseling or treatment, but they are managing that person's mental health care. So this is a process, a service that's provided through a legal process that is known as conservatorship. And you may have heard that in the news lately because Britney Spears was under conservatorship with her father. I really, really hope that Britney Spears' ordeal with conservatorship, because she's no longer under conservatorship, right? Like it was decided that, hey, she doesn't need her father or another human being managing her life. But I really hope that people going, oh, what is conservatorship? How does that work? That it helps some people, particularly disabled people whose family members may have taken over their finances, their care, that it helps them to find some more freedom and resources to manage things. But so if a family member is unable, that is when the court provides a conservator, and that is called public guardianship. So I want to just say, I looked for an article to share with you. Now, oftentimes, when I look for the articles that I share with you, I am looking for a sociological perspective or, excuse me, a first person perspective of some kind. I couldn't find that in this case. And you might say, well, it's because people under guardianship are mentally ill. And that would be one answer. Another answer would be, we don't hear those stories because people who are considered mentally ill or who are under public guardianship in particular often do not have what are considered valid voices to be shared. And I'm going to keep looking now. Maybe you'll want to as well. But I feel like there's got to be some first person narrative out there from someone who is or has been under public guardianship. Right now, we're hearing a lot from Britney Spears' conservatorship, which is different. That's not a public guardian. It was a family guardian. But yeah, so I don't have an article to share with you about this. You certainly can, do some Googling on your own and see what you might come up with. And hey, share it with me. as time goes on if you'd like to. Gosh, there's more to say about this, but like I said, it varies from state to state and sometimes county to county within a state, how guardianship works. So I think I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has questions or comments, things you want to talk about.
Looks like someone had iPhone, you're unmuted. Did you want to just start talking? Oh,
I
no,
also see
they
Nancy had
muted themselves. You go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to say, I'm in Missouri, and guardianship and conservatorship are two different things here. Conservatorship is just about money and assets. Guardianship is about the person. So a guardian can then sign a person in and out of the hospital. A guardian usually also has conservatorship, but a conservator doesn't necessarily be a guardian. And here it's a public administrator who does that for people who don't have anyone else to do that. When I worked at the state hospital many years ago, part of my job as the social worker there was to report back to the court once a year whether the public administrators were doing their jobs adequately. Yeah. So there was a system built in for a little bit of accountability there.
That's great. And I'm really glad to hear you make this distinction between managing someone's finances and managing their care, because it seems to me that in a lot of states, it really is more about managing the person's finances than actually providing any sort of services whatsoever. And that's concerning. I know this is fiction, and so I hesitate to mention it, but I also think that it is super interesting to look at popular culture and how the kinds of things that we are discussing show up in popular culture. So there's a film called I Care a Lot. Has anyone seen that film? Oh gosh. It's it's dark and funny, but you know what? The premise is that it's about a public guardian, and it's a nefarious individual who is in cahoots with doctors and nursing homes to get people who are very rich, declared incompetent and sent to nursing homes so that their estate can be liquidated. And in that particular state, which is actually true in some, conservators can be paid additional funds from an individual's estate that they are managing. Now, for instance, in the state of California, that is not the case, right? So the state of California has a situation where a conservator is paid a wage by the state of California, and they cannot receive any additional pay from the estate of the individual, the resources of the individual. But anyway, the film is dark and funny, and it's about how that system might run amok in a dystopia that is only that far away from from what's actually happening. And of course, the older person who gets put away is played by Judi Dench, which is makes it really a great film too. I like her. Yes, Nancy.
Also, one of the things I hear from people sometimes is they get confused about durable power of attorney for healthcare. And that does not go into effect until somebody is declared incompetent or is unconscious. But I heard of a situation recently where the child who had the durable power of attorney for healthcare actually was allowed to sign somebody into a nursing facility. Yeah. And nobody seemed to notice that was not altogether the way it should be.
Yeah.
And lots of people get very very confused about that.
The policies and the ways that they are implemented are labyrinthine. They are, more like a maze, really, than a labyrinth. They're really difficult to navigate. And I've been involved in that with my own family, as I mentioned. So it is interesting to continue learning about how these systems operate. But I think, again, the sociologist in me wants you to consider the question: who is worthy of care in our culture, and what does care look like, and how is it related to or intersecting with the idea of resource management. These are the questions that you know, we might do well to ask. So my question to you, as usual, is, are these things that you see yourself talking about with others? I mean, maybe the thing about mindfulness or the thing about public conservators are, or public guardians, pardon me. Maybe that's not something you've thought about before. Maybe it's something you might think about some more. Might you talk about these things? Like, if you already have an idea, I'd love to hear it, where you might discuss topics like these.
I work at a tech startup in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're 99% remote. And for some reason, there's a very good culture around not working too hard, believe it or not, or balance. And I don't know how it got started. I can only assume it was from the founders, but my team starts every day with on our morning meeting, we do a meditation. I mean, it's always open for discussion, for changing and all that, but like the meditation itself doesn't really do it for me, but it also kind of does, because I start every day where my boss's boss is like, make sure to drink lots of water, he doesn't run the meditation, but just the culture is really supportive of like, let's not get COVID and then continue to do terrible like work-life balance. Like let's have learned something. It seems like that's the vibe from this whole situation. So anyway, my point is, I don't know who started it, but I would imagine that it doesn't take very much. Well, I realize my incredibly privileged work position and all that, and financial position in the world, but I would imagine that it doesn't take much beyond having one person to drive this practice in a company, because now that it feels like things have changed in the limited worlds that I roam through, feels like being on Zoom with any group sort of levels the power imbalance a little bit, assuming it's a meeting like this of peer-ishness. So, just like, I think there's opportunity for us to try to implement good practices in the places where we are. And because they're needed and appreciated, and like, I think a lot of people are. I mean, I don't need to say I think a lot of people are anything, because actually I fucking sit in my house all day long and don't know much about the rest of the world. But
the thing that you're bringing up is, I think, is well taken. That if people find these practices useful, it is possible to talk about how useful you find them in order to help legitimize use. Like, literally, that is within our power.
Yeah.
I also want to, Candace, if you want to unmute, you can say this, or I'll read some of what you just said here.
We just have a caregivers group, and we share how it's going and give each other information, helping to care for elderly, mostly parents. And then also think this is a perfect topic for faith group.
Yeah, really good. Really good. Thank you for those comments. So, the reason I ask you this question about where you might talk about these things has to do with the fact that we can practice what we want, what discourse we want to bring into the world. We can practice that. And sometimes it's useful to think ahead about, I might talk about this to this person. So that's what I have for you today. And I would love it if you continue to share this opportunity with folks. I think Emily shared with you my social media, but also, these are posted again on YouTube. So if somebody missed a particular topic that they really want to delve into, you can do that. But I'll be here next month, and you can send me questions or topics that you would like me to cover. I'd be happy to do it. Anything else today? All right. I'll see you in February. Thanks a bunch, Emily.